New mimer today. Thank you for the round of applause. Okay, we're going to learn Maimer Vata Berachamecha Harabim, which the Rebbe said Shabbos Chanukah Tafshin Memches, 1987, and the Maimer is based on a Maimer by the Frierdiker Rebbe from 50 years before that, so from 1937. The Rebbe said this Maimer in 1987, and then it was edited and published in 1989, right? So 2 years later, for Chanukah of 89, Chanukah Tafshinun is when the Maimer was edited by the Rebbe, was Muga from the Rebbe. Just an interesting note about this. The Rebbe's Maimer is based, as we mentioned, on the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer from 1937. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said this Maimer on Shabbos Chanukah, 1937, Tafresh Tzadik Ches. He was living then in Atvatsk. He was in Atvatsk in Poland. And so it was Shabbos Parshas Miketz, it's also Shabbos Chanukah. And on Tuesday, a chassid from Lemberg, Rebbe Shleima of Lemberg, his last name is unknown, but he had come to Atvatsk to be by the Frierdiker Rebbe. And he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe to say Chassidus. So the Frierdiker Rebbe actually wasn't well then. He was not long after Chanukah, a few weeks after Chavdal Tevis, he left. He went out of the country, went to Purkersdorf, I think, to a sanatorium. He was not well. He was weak. But the Frierdiker Rebbe said that that he says Chassidus on Shabbos. This is Tuesday. So the Chassid said that when I come to the Rebbe, so it's Shabbos. When I'm by the Rebbe, it's Shabbos. So now it's Shabbos. So the Frierdiker Rebbe basically said you're in luck, because he said punkt that he had just Frierdiker Rebbe just said Bashkacha Pratis, by divine providence, he had just heard something said by one of the Rebbes that from one of the Rabbeim, Chabad Rebbes, that Chassid, was a Chassid sagt, ist gerecht. Was a Chassid sagt, ist gerecht, or something to that effect. But a Chassid says something, he's usually right. So the fact that by divine providence he had just heard this, saying that when a Chassid says something with his conviction, he's usually right. He knows what he's talking about. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said this Maimer a second time. He said it for this Chassid the second time on that week of Chanukah, on Tuesday. So that's the Maimer that the Rebbe's Maimer is based on. That story has nothing to do with the Maimer itself, I don't think. If you want to try and figure out some kind of connection, you can do that. I just thought it was an interesting Yishmakeh story, and appropriate. Today's Erev Rosh Hashanah, the day before Yitis Kislev, which is the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. So it's appropriate to be obviously to learning Chassidus together, and this idea that one of the things that we have with Chassidus is the beautiful relationship between a Rebbe and a Chassid, and the connection of Rebbe and a Chassid that's established or solidified through their Torah. So it's certainly appropriate all the way around. And for us, we delve into the Rebbe's Torah. By uns is Shabbos. It's Yom Shekol Shabbos Menucha. All is related. Okay, so let's get into the Maimer. V'ata Berachamecha Harabim. That's from Shabbos Parshas Miketz, Shabbos Chanukah Tafshin Memches. V'ata Berachamecha Harabim, and you, in your abounding mercy, Amadat Alehem Beis Rasam, you were with them. You stood up for them in their time of distress, Masarti Gibarim Biat Chalashim, and you delivered the strong in the hands of the weak. V'rabim Bad Mi'atim Chulu, and the many in the hands of the few. So this is obviously a quote from the Val Nisim prayer, which we say on Chanukah. Right, we say Val Nisim in Shemona Esrei, in Moedim, and we say it in benching. And in it we say, after we talk about all the different things that happened in the times of Matisyahu and his children, and the terrible persecution that the Jewish people were facing at the time of the story of Chanukah, and then it turns and we say V'ata Berachamecha Harabim, that the Eibishter God came to our rescue, and He delivered us. And what happened there? So it was strong in the hands of the few, in the weak, and the many in the hands of the few, and the sinners in the hands of the righteous, and so on and so forth. So the Frierdiker Rebbe asks in his Maimer by the same title, which he said 50 years earlier, right? 50 years before this Maimer was said, this was in 87, that was in 37. So 50 years prior, that the primary miracle of Chanukah is the miracle of the victory, of the military victory, which occurred on the 24th of Kislev. And that was actually what led to the miracle of the oil, the jug of oil that was found on the 25th of Kislev. Like we find in the Gemara says that when the Gemara asks, "My Chanukah, what's Chanukah?" and the Gemara starts the story like almost in the middle. It says that when the Chashmonaim defeated the Syrian Greek Empire, when they defeated, they chased them out of Jerusalem. So once they defeated them, Ozdafka, it was only then that Matzu Pachachat Shemen Shal Shemen Chulu. It was only after the victory that they were able to then go ahead and find the jug of oil, and then the miracle occurred, and they were able to use it and light with that jug of oil for 8 days. So the Friedrich Rebbe asks in his Maimer, why is it that if we have the miracle of the victory, that took place on the 24th of Kislev, the miracle of the oil started on the 25th. So then why did we establish Hanukkah on the 25th and not on the 24th? When the main miracle, the miracle that gave way to all, made it possible for all the other subsequent miracles, the finding of the oil, the oil lasting for 8 days, it all starts with the military victory, which is on the 24th. So why then was Hanukkah established on the 25th and not on the 24th? Excuse me. So the Rebbe is going to develop this question a little bit more, but before we get into it, so Hanukkah is a very, very complicated holiday. It seems to be very straightforward, right? There are decrees against Judaism. Jews were being persecuted, and the temple is defiled, and certain mitzvahs were outlawed, and then a group of rebels, they formed a militia, and they managed to somehow, with this guerrilla warfare over the course of a number of years, were able to finally claim victory and regain sovereignty over Jerusalem or over the temple, right? And rededicate the Beis HaMikdash. And then what happened when they did this? They found a jug of oil that had oil to last for 1 day. It lasted for 8 days, and that's why we have the miracle of Hanukkah. But when you go beyond that surface, things get very complicated. What was the miracle? What was the reason that the holiday of Hanukkah was established? Why did they establish Hanukkah? What are we commemorating? That's one question. Another question is, even with the miracle of oil, is a very complicated conversation as well. Why did they even need to find pure oil? Right? They found pure oil. How were they able to even to light the pure oil if they were impure? Why did the oil last for 8 days? Why is Hanukkah 8 days? If the oil was enough to last for 1 day and not 8 days, so it's known as the Shaila of the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef's question, why? And the miracle was 7 days, not 8 days. So why is it? Right? That's the famous question. There are many answers, and every answer to all these questions creates new questions. So none of these answers are really satisfactory, because each one creates a new problem. So the literature surrounding Hanukkah, and even just the establishment of Hanukkah, and what is that we're commemorating is vast. But this idea of what are we commemorating Hanukkah, or why was Hanukkah established? Basically, there are really two general opinions. The opinion based on Rashi, the way Rashi understands the Gemara, then there's the opinion of the Rambam. Basically, they would fall into these two categories. The Gemara says, "My Chanukah." We just quoted before. The Gemara asks, "What's Chanukah?" Right. So, what's the question? What's the Gemara asking? So Rashi says, "Al ezen eskavua." What was the miracle for which they established Chanukah? And what's the miracle for which they established Chanukah then? If the question of my Chanukah, the Gemara is, what was the miracle that led them to establish Chanukah? What's the Gemara say? They found oil that only can last for 1 day, lasted for 8 days. So therefore we have the holiday for 8 days commemorating the miracle of the oil. So why did we establish Chanukah? For the miracle of the oil. Right? And that's why it's Halal and Haidah. That's why we say Halal on Chanukah, and we give thanks to God, and we light candles. Right, that's how we commemorate it. That's a spiritual thing related to the spiritual miracle of the oil. The Rambam gives a very different account of it. The Rambam says that the Rambam goes into great length in Hilchos Chanukah about the persecution and about the war and about the victory. And the Rambam also talks about the fact that on Chanukah you have to eat and drink and be merry. You have to have sudas. You have to. So the Rambam clearly learns that Chanukah was established not only because of the miracle of the oil, but also because of the victory, the military victory. Then how does the Rambam learn my Chanukah? What's the Gemara's question? So the Gemara, because the Gemara only mentions the victory in passing, right? So, and just focuses on the miracle of the oil. So the Rambam learns the Gemara's question, my Chanukah, really, as in why was Chanukah established as a holiday commemorated with candles and with Halal and Haida. In other words, because it was a military victory, it should have been more a holiday that has more of a materialistic sort of commemoration, right? Primarily a Suda. So why is there Halal? Why do we say Halal on Hanukkah? Why do we light candles? So that's the Gemara's question, right? Or another way you can ask the question, my Hanukkah, which is why is the holiday 8 days, not 1 day? So why was it 8 days? Also because of the miracle. So you can learn it even in the Gemara. You can learn different ways, but that's one dispute between them, right? What is the miracle for which Hanukkah was established, right? Why was it established? Another thing, the Rebbe said over here that Hanukkah, they found the military victory was on the 24th, and they found the oil on the 25th, right? And that's the whole premise for the question. Then why is it if the military victory was 24, not on the 25th? So then why do they establish the holiday on the 25th, not on the 24th? That too is not without controversy. The Meiri learns that the military victory was on the 24th. That's when they defeated the enemy, and the 25th was the miracle of the oil. But many of the other commentaries learn that the military victory was also on the 25th. So it's also not so simple. But the point is, in Chassidus, this again relates, we're talking, this is the season, Rosh Hashanah for Chassidus. Chassidus it wants to understand, Elu Velu Divrei Elokim Chaim. All the opinions within Torah are also Torah, which means they all require understanding, and they also all teach us something. They tell us something about the nature of the holiday, and they teach us something in terms of our lives, a lesson for us. So in Chassidus, we find how all these different opinions, even though they seem to contradict each other, right? They seem to be mutually exclusive opinions, opposite opinions. Nevertheless, they can all kind of coexist. Not only that, they can all kind of fit together, and we can learn something from them. But this mimer, as we're going to see in the next paragraph, is built on the premise according to one opinion, right? So let's see what the Rebbe says here. Shleimar. Sorry? We just discussed all the opinions. If you don't listen the first time, I can listen the second time. Okay. Yeah, Shleimar. So you can say, the reason why the holiday of Chanukah was established on the 25th of Kislev, not on the 24th, right? So the question here is, why was it established on the 25th and not on the 24th? But you'll find in other Mamari Chassidus, including other Mamarim Chassidus that start with the same title, which seemingly would mean that they have this sort of coming from the same, built on the same premise, and coming from the same angle. So he says in the other Mamarim, the question is, Madua kavu Chanukah al nes tepachashem and v'leil nes temitzachna melchama. Who keep at Durshim anal koila shita shayam tev Chanukah nikvarak al nes haneris. V'lachem medayik shalachayra ha'ikar hu nitzachna melchama. So he says that in other, there's a difference here. This mimer that we're quoting here from the Friedrich Rebbe, where the question is, why is it established on the 24th and on the 25th? That question you don't find in other mamarim. In other mamarim, there's a different question. The question in other mamarim is, why did they establish Hanukkah because of the miracle of the oil? In other words, the main miracle is the victory. They're being persecuted.
So that's the same thing, because that happened on the previous day.
Right, but it's a different question. Why? Because you can't say, no, because you can't ask. Well, let's finish this and I'll tell you why it's not. Yeah. Let's just look at this again. In other Mamarim, the question is, why was Hanukkah established for the miracle of the oil and not for the miracle of the victory, right? The military victory. What's that question? That question is rooted in a different opinion. That question is rooted on the opinion that Hanukkah was established because of the miracle of the candles, right? And since it was established, in other words, like we said about Rashi says, my Hanukkah, what was the miracle on which Hanukkah was found? For what miracle was it established? And it's for the miracle of the oil. So if it's established for the miracle of the oil, that starts when? On Chav Hei. So therefore you can't ask why was it on Chav Hei and not on Chav Daled, because Chav Daled was the miracle of the war. And and Hanukkah wasn't established for the war. So therefore, in other Mamarim, they're not going to ask, since another Mamarim, they follow Rashi's opinion. Right, or the questions are based on the opinion of Rashi, which is that Hanukkah was established because of the miracle of the oil. If that's the case, then what's the question? You can't ask why is it established on 25th, not 24th, because 24th is the military, and we're not commemorating the military, we're commemorating the oil. That's 25th. So that's not a valid question. So what's the question then? Why would you establish the holiday on the oil and not on the war? Which is a good question too.
Our question is based on the other opinion, which says that it was because of the war.
Right. So, or both. the war is also part of it. In which case, that's the question. So why are you establishing on the next day, not on the day that we won?
We never won ever. We never made a party on winning a war. We never made a party.
You do it all the time.
Which one? The Jews won a war in the time between us.
Purim.
Purim was a war.
Sure. Sure.
We just didn't go to party. We didn't go to Achashverosh. Party wasn't a war.
I was wondering because it says by Purim, think about it. On Purim it says that why did they celebrate Purim on Yud Daled? Because they fought on Yud Gimel and they rested on Yud Daled, right? So l'chayre, we have already precedent. Chanukah comes after Purim. So Purim they established, they won the war on the Yud Gimel on the 13th, and they established the holiday on the 14th, on the day of rest. So what's the question here? They're the same thing. The victory was on the 24th, and they rested on the 25th. I was wondering. So I think the difference is because here there was also another miracle happened on the 25th. So if I establish Hanukkah on the 25th, what am I pointing to? The miracle that happened on the 25th, which is so you lose on Purim. There was no other miracle. They won on the 13th and they rested on the 14th. That they made that day of rest the commemoration for what happened the day before. But if you do it here, if you do the same thing here.
Word of Hanukkah.
Well, the question is going to be developed a little further. We'll understand it sort of answers his question without even asking it. The fact is that if we're going to establish it on the 25th, we're going to focus then on what happened on the 25th, not what happened on the previous day. So if we want to give proper attention and commemoration to what happened on the 24th, then in this case we should have established it on the 24th. Okay? So in other Mamarim, this is not the question. Why is it not a question? Because they're coming from the perspective that why do we celebrate Hanukkah? Why is Hanukkah established? Because of the miracle of the oil. The miracle of the oil is on the 25th, so that's why they celebrate on the 25th. We'll see soon exactly what it means that the miracle of the oil on the 25th is also not so simple. But in our Maimer, it follows the opinion that the opinion that why was the Hanukkah established also not only because of the oil but also because of the military victory, right? Like we said from the Rambam, to the extent that we find the V'al Nisim, which by the way our Maimer's quote opens with a quote from the V'al Nisim prayer. The V'al Nisim prayer commemorates what? What is that? The focus of the V'al Nisim, the victory. Well, he says in brackets. He says Be'ikr. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. Why is that? What is this warning? Yeah. So in V'al Nisim we talk about mainly the military victory, right? We commemorate the miracle of the oil with the menorah, the lighting of the menorah. We commemorate the miracle of the war with the victory with the V'al Nisim, right? And our Maimer is quoting from the V'al Nisim, which is. So we're rooted in the opinion that Hanukkah is maybe not exclusively, but at least also in part established because of the military victory. So if so, so since our Maimer is coming from the opinion, based on the opinion that Hanukkah is established also because of the military victory, and not only that also because of the military victory, but really the military victory is what made it possible for the oil victory altogether. Without the victory, there wouldn't be the miracle of the oil, right? So therefore, the question is, why do we start on the 25th and not on the 24th? Which again, as we said, even that is also narrow. That's according to the opinion of the Meiri, the Gemara, that the victory occurs on the 24th, not on the 25th. Not everybody holds that opinion, but that's what we're asking. Let's take a look back in the footnotes. Yeah, so when he says that the Yom Tov of Chanukah, we'll look at note 7. It says note 6. The Rebbe sends us to look at the Sichas Chelik Yud. The Rebbe talks about these opinions, the machlokes between Rashi and the Rambam, in terms of Chanukah, and deals with those two opinions. But here he says that according to one opinion, the position of Rashi, right, is that Hanukkah was established only Rak al Nesaner, only because of the miracle of the candles, right? So he says in note 7, like we discussed this before, Kipashas Lashon Hashas Shabbos Sham, like the Gemara says, my Hanukkah, right? The Gemara asks, what's Hanukkah, and what's the question? And continuing says, that they found the one jug of oil and they lit for 8 days. Rashi explains, what's the Gemara asking? My Chanukah, what's Chanukah? What's Rashi explain? Al ezen as kavuha. Right? What was the miracle for which they established Chanukah? And what is the answer? So if that's the Gemara's question, what's the Gemara's answer? Clearly only the miracle of the oil. That's the only one it mentions. Right? It fast forwards, it glosses over the military victory. What's Chanukah? Why did they establish it? After there was a war, they found the oil and they had a miracle, and that's why they lit it. Okay. But then he says, but our mimer here is also according to the opinion that Chanukah is established also because of the military victory. If so, what's the Gemara's question? My Chanukah. My Chanukah, we said, Alezen es kavuha. And the Gemara, so it seems clearly that the Gemara's opinion is that Chanukah was established because of the miracle of the oil. So to this opinion that Chanukah was established also for the military victory, how do you learn Pshat? So the Rebbe says, note 9, Upirish, my Chanukah b'Shabbos sham hu zeh shetiknu ches yimei Chanukah. Right? Other commentators said, what's the question, my Chanukah? The question is, why is Chanukah 8 days? Why Chanukah was established is because of the military victory and all the miracles. But why is it 8 days? So that's what the Gemara is concerned with. The Gemara's question by Chanukah is why for 8 days? Oh, that's one question. Or another way to understand the question by Chanukah is why was Chanukah was established is obvious because of the military victory. It's a big miracle. But why then is it also halal an haidah? Why do we establish it for that? So that's because of the miracle of the oil. Why is that the question? Because kibim hayam tavay rak mi penanes the mitzach namchama you may simcha v'lei may halva hida. Baruch look at Tzich about 6. That the question of my Chanukah we can say it. So we have 3 ways of understanding my Chanukah. Number 1, my Chanukah, why was it established? That's Rashi's question. And according to that, if that's the question, then the answer is it was established only because of the miracle of the candles. Or we can ask another question: my Chanukah, why was Chanukah 8 days? So here, there's room to say Chanukah is established because of all these miracles. Why though is it 8 days? Purim is 1 day, right? Why do we need 8 days of Chanukah? So that's to commemorate one of the miracles, which is an 8-day miracle, the miracle of the oil. Or another way of understanding Chanukah, where it can also be established for the military victory, is my Chanukah. Why is Chanukah established to be days of Halal and Haidah? Because if Chanukah was only to commemorate the military victory, so then it would be Yemei Simcha. Right, the Rebbe talks about in Sichos. According to the Rambam, you'll notice we don't really paskin in Shulchan Aruch. It says the Ramai thing brings that we have to add your marbin sudas that we celebrated also. We did our jelly donuts and latkes. You're supposed to increase in meals and have celebrations, but that's not really the main thing. The mitzvah of Chanukah is lighting the menorah, lighting the candles. But according to the Rambam, it seems that really part of the mitzvah is also a su'udah. You have to eat on Chanukah. Why? Because since part of the reason of the celebration of Chanukah is to commemorate the miracle of the victory, so since that's a physical salvation, it's not the miracle of the oil is a sort of a more spiritual thing. But the military victory, that's a physical thing. We were in mortal danger and we came out of it. So therefore you need to commemorate with something physical, a physical celebration. Yeah, but the candles are a spiritual concept. It's a spiritual light.
You see that
it's more of a spiritual thing.
By Purim,
Exactly. The difference. Purim, one of the mitzvahs is a meal. Another mitzvah is even Shalach Manas and even Matanos Levirim. Those are all physical things. Right? There is no spiritual commemoration for Purim at all, actually. There's no spiritual commemoration. Even the reading the Megillah, you're reading the story. It's not a spiritual thing. You're telling the story of the miracle. Okay, so you're coming from a very informed place, right? Which is when we talk about that Chanukah, that Purim was the danger was to the threat was to the Jewish body. Chanukah, the threat was to the Jewish soul, and so therefore Purim we celebrate with the physical celebration and commemoration, and Chanukah is a spiritual one. So you're saying Chanukah is a spiritual one, not a physical one. But if Chanukah, there was also a threat to the Jewish body, that there was a war. And we went. It was a very dangerous war, right? Harabim biad matam. We were undermanned. We were outnumbered. We were weaker, and so it was a very dangerous war. There was a real threat, and so there was a physical threat as well. And so that physical threat the miracle that we survived, right? That we were saved from that physical threat should be expressed in a physical commemoration as well. Exactly, and that's talked about according to the Rambam. There is a physical commemoration to it, right? Okay, so So our Maimer is coming from the position that Hanukkah is not exclusively for the miracle of the candles, but also because of the military victory. And so then the question of Hanukkah, so we addressed in note 9. Then he says that the Haidah of Al Anisim is primarily on this miracle, the miracle of the victory. Right? If you look at Al Anisim, so the Rebbe says, in brackets it says Be'ikr, that it's primarily. Why is it Be'ikr? Because is Hanukkah... is the Va'al Anisim, when we look at Va'al Anisim, is the miracle of the candles mentioned there at all? The miracle of the oil, is that at all mentioned? Or is it just the military victory? It says, Va'achakach bo b'nechel l'dir b'eisecha, right, that after they won, then they came into the Beis Hamikdash and they cleaned it up and they purified it, right? They removed all the impurities and they lit candles in your courtyards, in your holy courtyards, right? But really, the whole thing starts b'mei Matisyo. There was the Malchus Yavan had come, the Syrian Greek Empire had come and started persecuting the Jews, and then it goes through primarily the main bulk of the prayer is about a war and defeating a mightier enemy, right? If it mentions the candles, it's only mentioned sort of in passing. After this whole victory, then they came and they lit candles and they established Hanukkah, right, to give thanks. So, is it mentioned? Is not mentioned. So clear for sure. Va'al Anisim is the focus of Va'al Anisim is certainly on the war. Right? So where the candles are basically on the miracle of the oil, Va'al Anisim is certainly primarily focused on the war. Is it also on the candles or not? So that's the address is in note 10. He says in brackets, right, Be'ikr, that Va'al Anisim is mainly the military, meaning that it also commemorates or makes mention of the miracle of the oil, right? So let's see in note 10. The Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer, on which our Maimer is based, so when he talks about the Valanism, he says that that the Valanism lists all the different details of the military victory, and then mentions then moves on to explain the miracle of the oil, that they found the oil and the menorah, and he had the miracle of the 8 days with the oil. So the Rebbe says, the fact that the Frierdiker Rebbe says this, well, clearly it's not mentioned explicitly. There's no mention of finding oil, and there's no mention of the oil lasting for 8 days. That's for sure not. What the Frierdiker Rebbe is clearly saying is that it's an allusion to it. That when it says that that they lit candles in your holy courtyards, that is a reference to the menorah. The Rebbe says, even if you want to say, and this idea of the question is, does that refer to the miracle of the oil or not? Or is it something else? No, Va'al Anisim is primarily focused on the war. But is there any mention of the miracle of the oil in Va'al Anisim? So that's the question. The Rebbe quotes in note 10 from the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer, where the Frierdiker Rebbe seems to imply that that there is a reference to the miracle of the oil. So the Rebbe's come in our Maimer. The Rebbe is really saying that Va'al Anisim makes no mention of the miracle of the oil. That's why he says Be'ikr primarily puts it in brackets that really Va'al Anisim is only about the miracle of the war and not at all about the oil. So he says that the Frierdiker Rebbe Taka mentions could be understood to be a reference to the miracle of the oil. But even if you want to say that there's a reference to it, it's definitely only in passing, and it's definitely not in detail. There's no mention of finding it, like we said. There's no mention of the 8 days, any miracle, just that they lit candles. So it's a reference. And the Kutasichas, the Rebbe talks about this. The Rebbe explains that the Vidliku B'Dineris B'Chazik Jecha is actually not a reference to the menorah and to the miracle of the oil. He says means they came, they rededicated the temple, and they celebrated. And what do you do when you celebrate? You light candles. They illuminated the whole courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Rebbe quotes from the Chassam Sofer, who says that it's a reference to the menorah. And then the question is, if Vidliku is the menorah, so how did it end up in the Chatzah, in the courtyard? The menorah is lit in the sanctuary, not in the courtyard. So how's it? So that's what we said. Every question, when it comes to the topic of Hanukkah, every question that you have an answer, there's another question that it opens up a whole other can of worms. So good. So the Rebbe addressed it, but the Rebbe basically is of the opinion, at least there, and we said that's not a contradiction. He can have the opinion in one mimer, one sikha one way, and another one he can explain another way, according to all the opinions. But that the isn't even a reference. So certainly there, the alanism is not at all a reference to the candles. It's only to the victory, right? And even if you want to say that there's a reference, it's only a reference in passing. Okay. Note 11. How are we doing on time, by the way? 1 minute. So he said in the at the end of the paragraph, the question is, why do we say now that we're talking about the establishment of Hanukkah for the miracle of the victory? The victory takes place on the 24th. So why is it not established on the 24th? Why is it on the 25th, not on the 24th? So note 11, the Rebbe says, right? He says that Hanukkah was established on the day of rest. We talked about this, right? Right? So if he says that it was established on the day of rest, clearly if it's a day of rest, it's a rest for more, meaning that even in the Torah, in the Torah, the Alter Rebbe is also, when he makes that statement, is also informed by that position, that Hanukkah was established for the victory. And it's just that instead of establishing it on the day of the victory, it was established on the day of rest, which means that it was established also in relation to the war. But l'chayr tzarich lemer shegam sham koil hashiddush achidush b'maimer zeh hu delukut Torah sham atam al zeh shenikva b'chafei l'malchus hamizochen u'lefi shu yem hamenucha shel achrei hanitzachim b'maimer zeh b'nei shechav b'chafei ha'yinas haneiris kid l'kamen tziv zayin. And this is an answer to what we talked about before. So the Rebbe says that the difference is that by the Alter Rebbe's Mamarim, he talks about it. He's saying that it's established on the 25th in relation to the war. That there was a war that ended on 24. So why then, if we're establishing and commemorating the war, why is it on the next day? Because they established on the day of rest. But here, in our mimer, the question, so then that answers the question. Why is the 24th not the 25th? Because it was the day of rest. So the Rebbe says over no. In our mimer, the question is, why is it establishing on the 25th? The 25th is the miracle of the candles. And so if you establish on the 25th, you're establishing it to commemorate that. So it's almost like you lose that whole idea of it being a day of rest because you're focused on the miracle of the oil. So if so, back to the question, why is it established on the 24th and not on the 20th? Why is it established on the 25th, which is the day of the miracle of the oil, and not on the 24th, which is the victory of the war?